You lose someone. You stand at the front of a room. You say words you have said 100 times before at other funerals, and somehow they still feel true. Flowers on a coffin, a photograph on an easel, a line of people waiting to say they are sorry for your loss. It feels ancient. It feels like something humans have always done. But the real answer is far stranger than that. For most of human history, the dead were not buried at all. They were left, dropped in a river, carried off by animals, forgotten within a season. Grief, as a ritual, as a performance, as a set of rules everyone agrees to follow, that is new, shockingly new. And the moment it appeared tells you something about your own species that you were never taught in school. Let's go back. Not centuries, not even thousands of years. Go back over 100,000 years to a cave in what is now northern Iraq called Shanidar. In the 1950s, an archaeologist named Ralph Solecki was digging there and found something that broke the rules of what a Neanderthal was supposed to be capable of. A skeleton curled in the dirt surrounded by clusters of ancient pollen. Solecki's team argued the pollen came from flowers, real flowers, yarrow, cornflower, hollyhock, placed deliberately around a body. For decades, this was called the flower burial. A Neanderthal mourned with a bouquet. It became proof to many people that Neanderthals were not brutish animals, but something closer to us. Something that could love. Something that could lose. Here's the twist. Modern research complicates the whole story. A team led by archaeologist Chris Hunt re-examined the site decades later and found evidence the pollen may have been dragged in by burrowing rodents, not laid there by grieving hands. So which is it? Was Shanidar the oldest known act of human mourning, or a beautiful story built on rodent tunnels? Nobody knows for certain. And that uncertainty is the point. Because even without the flowers, something else at Shanidar cannot be explained away. The body itself was placed in a shallow pit, positioned, not discarded, not left where it fell. Someone chose to do that. Someone decided a body deserved a different fate than the forest floor. That decision, to treat a corpse differently than you'd treat anything else, is where mourning begins, not with flowers. With placement, with care. And Shanidar wasn't alone. Elsewhere in Europe, at a site called La Chapelle aux Saints in France, another Neanderthal skeleton was found folded into a small carved hollow in the cave floor, a hollow that appears to have been dug specifically to receive the body. Paleoanthropologist Eric Trinkhaus, who has spent much of his career analyzing Neanderthal skeletal remains, has pointed out that several of these individuals lived for years with injuries that should have killed them. A missing arm, blindness in one eye, crushed ribs that healed unevenly. Someone fed them. Someone protected them. Long before anyone buried these people, someone had already decided their lives were worth the cost of keeping alive. Burial, it turns out, may simply be care continuing past the point where it stops making biological sense. Now push forward, tens of thousands of years, to a site in Russia called Sungir. Around 34,000 years ago, someone buried two children there, head to head in a single grave. Their bodies were covered in thousands of tiny ivory beads, each one carved by hand from mammoth tusk. Archaeologist Randall White, who spent years studying the ornamentation at Sungir, estimated that a single strand of those beads could have taken over an hour to produce. Multiply that by thousands of beads. That is not a quick goodbye. That is weeks, maybe months of a community's labor poured into two small bodies before they were lowered into frozen ground. Why? What could possibly justify that kind of investment for people who could no longer use it, see it, or thank you for it? Here is where the story stops being about archaeology and starts being about you. Because the instinct behind Sungir's beads is the same instinct behind your own impulse to buy flowers for a funeral, to write a eulogy, to spend money on a headstone. None of it serves the dead. All of it serves the living. Psychologist and anthropologist Ernest Becker argued that human beings are the only animals aware of their own inevitable death, and that this awareness is so unbearable that entire cultures organize themselves around managing it. Burial rituals, in his view, aren't really about honoring the person who died. They're about proving to everyone still standing at the graveside that death does not simply erase a person, that something remains, a name, a memory, a story that gets told again. You do this too, whether you realize it or not. When you scroll through old photos of someone you lost, you're not doing it for them. You're doing it because it makes the loss feel survivable, because it turns absence into something you can hold, even if only for a moment. There's a reason grief feels so physically overwhelming, almost like an injury. Neuroscientist Mary Frances O'Connor has spent years studying what happens inside the brain during bereavement, and her research suggests that losing someone close to you activates regions associated with physical pain, not just emotional sadness. Your brain, in a very real sense, treats the loss of a person the way it treats a wound, which raises an uncomfortable question. If your brain still reacts to grief like an ancient survival threat, what was it originally protecting you from? O'Connor describes attachment itself as a kind of prediction system. Your brain builds a map of the world that includes the people you love as fixed points, as reliable coordinates you can always return to. When one of those points disappears, the map doesn't update instantly. Part of your brain keeps searching for the person anyway, keeps expecting a text back, keeps listening for footsteps that used to mean they were home. That searching isn't weakness. It's an ancient system doing exactly what it evolved to do, refusing to accept a loss the body hasn't caught up with yet. Think about what death meant for most of human history. Not a single loss. A structural collapse. For tens of thousands of years, humans survived in small, interdependent bands, rarely more than a few dozen people, where every member handled a specific role: hunting, foraging, caregiving, defense. When one person died, the group didn't just lose a companion. It lost a hunter, a nurse, a memory bank of which plants were poisonous and which watering holes ran dry in summer. Death was a resource crisis disguised as an emotional one. Ritual mourning may have evolved to manage exactly that. A funeral wasn't only comfort, it was a coordination tool, a moment where the group reformed itself, reassigned roles, and publicly reaffirmed that the remaining members still belonged to each other. Anthropologist Paul Pettit, who has spent decades studying Paleolithic burial practices across Europe, has argued that the emergence of deliberate burial reflects the moment humans began treating death as a social event rather than simply a biological one, something that needed to be witnessed, marked, and processed by the group, not just endured by individuals. In his work tracing burial evidence across tens of thousands of years, Pettit suggests that the practice didn't spread evenly or all at once. It appeared, disappeared, and reappeared in different regions, almost as if each community had to independently arrive at the same realization, that a body left in silence was a wound the whole group would keep feeling. That's still exactly what a modern funeral does. People fly across the country, they take time off work they can't really afford to lose, they sit in a room together, often in near silence, doing something economically irrational. Why? Because the ritual was never really about the person in the coffin. It's about proving out loud to every living person in that room that the group still holds. And the specific shape of that ritual varies wildly, even though the underlying function stays the same. In parts of Indonesia, some communities keep a deceased relative's body at home for months, sometimes years, treating them almost as if they were simply ill, feeding them symbolically, talking to them daily, before a final, elaborate funeral is held. In many Western households, mourning is expected to be quieter, more private, wrapped up within a week or two so people can return to work. Psychologist Dennis Klass, who studied bereavement across cultures, challenged the old idea that healthy grief means fully letting go of the person who died. Instead, he proposed something called continuing bonds, the theory that most humans across nearly every culture studied don't sever their relationship with the dead at all. They transform it. They keep talking to the person in their head. They imagine what they'd say about a decision. They keep an old voicemail they'll never delete. That single idea reframes almost everything you thought grief was for. It was never really about saying goodbye. It was about learning how to keep someone with you after their body was gone. So the flowers at Shanidar, real or not, and the beads at Sungir, and the black clothes you wear to a funeral today, these are not separate customs invented independently by different cultures. They're branches of the exact same root. A species that could not stop imagining its own death and needed a way to make that knowledge livable. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Every ritual you associate with death, the eulogy, the gathering, the objects placed beside the body, predates writing, predates agriculture, predates almost every technology you'd call civilization. Before humans figured out how to grow food reliably, they had already figured out how to grieve formally. Mourning wasn't a byproduct of civilization. It was one of the first things that made civilization possible, because it was one of the first things that held a group of frightened, mortal people together long enough to build anything at all. Tonight, when you scroll past a memorial post online, or light a candle, or simply say someone's name out loud so it doesn't disappear, you are not performing a modern custom. You are running code written by people who never saw a wheel, never saw a written word, never imagined a species could send messages faster than a voice could carry across a valley. And somehow, across all of that distance, the instinct survived intact, because the real answer was never really about the dead at all. It was about what the living owe each other, so that losing someone never has to mean losing everything.